Today, we heard directly from the White House for the first time since the indictments of Russians for meddling with our election. The president's been unleashing on his predecessor for failing to prevent the sabotage. Sarah Sanders echoed that earlier.
Everybody wants to blame this on the Trump administration. Let's not forget that this happened under the Obama administration. He has been tougher on Russia in the first year than Obama was in 8 years combined.
She also addressed media skepticism about Mr. Trump's admission of election interference.
The president has acknowledged that multiple times before. He acknowledged it during the transition. He acknowledged it during a press conference in Poland, and he acknowledged it for a third time at a press event in Poland. He has stated several times, I think one of the places where you guys seem to get very confused, and it seems to happen regularly, the president hasn't said that Russia didn't meddle. What he's saying is it didn't have an impact, and it certainly wasn't with help from the Trump campaign.
Dana, you brought up the point yesterday that Mr. Obama said he didn't want to say anything publicly about Russian interference in October or November because he didn't want to be seen as publicly creating a lot of drama there for political reasons. Could he have not done something in the shadows?
Yes, and it is possible that they did and that we don't know about it.
True.
It could be something that they aren't able to talk about. Maybe they would declassify it now. I mean, there's a range of things. I had Ambassador Dan Fried on the Daily Briefing show yesterday, and he...
Dan?
You know Dan?
Oh, great guy.
He is a great guy.
Yeah.
Worked in multiple administrations. He was, as a career civil servant, became a ambassador under the Obama administration and working on Russia-Ukraine type issues. And he said in 2014, they were hyper-focused on Ukraine and what to do there and started doing... There's confetti flying down.
What is confetti coming
New Year's. Happy New Year's, everybody.
Everybody loves my points, I guess. So they were hyper-focused on that activity in 2014 and that they didn't realize the extent of the operation that Russia was going to try on the elections. And the technology was new and that he did say that there could have been more that they could have done back then. I don't know exactly what that might have been, and there could have been stuff that they did. I would say there's another reason for President Trump to be mad at the Russians. Not only did they attack the country, of which he is now the president, he's also, even if he hadn't won, I think that everybody should be mad as Americans that this happened on our soil. But it's also because of what Putin's actions here have worked to undermine President Trump's presidency. And if I were President Trump, I'd be mad about that. That's reason enough alone to try to take action against Putin.
It is, and a lot of people have criticized Mr. Trump, Greg, for not being stronger when it comes to sanctions. Although President Trump's done a lot in terms of things that have put Russia back on their heels, more so than what Obama did. But on the sanctions front, people criticize him for being soft.
There's a lot of hypocrisy to go around, and we're going to talk about this, about the protests being sponsored by the anti-protests being sponsored in the B bloc. What the Russians replicated on a small scale is what we do to ourselves daily. So all they did was they came out, they saw our team sport politics. I'm more worried about bigger threats. I'm worried about our banking and our power grid, and I think that's the stuff that's really like. That's the stuff that we survive on. We can live with trolls, even though they're a pain in the neck. We can live with trolls. You have me on the 5. But the bigger problem here is that political party leaders don't care about threats unless they are a threat to their power, right? It's not so much a threat to the United States, but how does it affect our election? And I think that's what bugs me most about Democrats, is that they really aren't that ticked off about the Russians until emotionally they were affected by the loss of Hillary Clinton. That's what is driving their anger, and that Trump won. That's why they're mad at the Russians. I don't think it's about the country as much as it is that they lost.
You wouldn't hear a peep about that.
No, you wouldn't.
Yeah, to your point, would you have had President Obama slap sanctions on the Russians if Hillary had won? He may not have done it. He may have just said, you know what, it's not an issue, we're not going to make a thing out of it, and cause Hillary... Yeah.
You think that? That they would let it go?
If Hillary had won and there wasn't all this crazy Russia-Trump collusion, election interference stuff...
Oh, I thought you meant that if the Russians were trying to collude with the Clinton campaign
No. I'm saying if
Republicans
Hillary
would
had won, do you think? I don't even think Obama would have slapped sanctions on the Russians.
Well, I mean, look, here's the thing. I think that it's really a concerted effort by the liberals, by the Democrats to delegitimize President Trump's election, victory. There really isn't specific empirical evidence and data to suggest that, in fact, it had an impact on the outcome of the election. We certainly know there's no evidence to suggest that there was tampering with the election results. The suggestion is that these bots were operating and that they were doing this, whole thing to try to create chaos within the American political system, within the election cycle, and disrupting in that way. But there isn't any evidence to say that it actually affected the outcome. It was out there. And some of it was, it's out there, but it wasn't in such a way in large-scale force that I think that it would have an ultimate effect. So now everyone's like whining about it. Well, guess what? Russians are no Russians. Hillary lost.
Speaking of whining, President Obama, I think it was in October, said this to Mr. Trump, who was complaining about rigged elections. Let's see it.
There is no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections. There's no evidence that that has happened in the past, or that there are instances in which that will happen this time. And so I'd advise Mr. Trump to stop whining and go try to make his case to get votes.
Juan?
Well, this is, to me, the almost amazing part of this conversation is that President Obama was responding to then-candidate Trump saying he was worried about voter fraud, that people were going to line up, or the big Democratic Party machines in cities were going to somehow rig the election against him. That's what the President Obama was responding to. Now, today, President Trump comes back, uses that quote that you just saw on the screen, and says that was about Russian meddling.
Can I respond?
Of course.
Because when Trump was talking about the election being rigged, I think he was talking about not only the potential for voter fraud.
No.
He was talking about fake polls. He was talking about letting Hillary off the hook, the whole system.
No, he was talking specifically about what he said was voter fraud, and as usual, pointing to minorities and saying, oh, this is what's going to happen in the big cities. This is how they're going to win this election. They've got it rigged. And even suggesting that he wouldn't honor the results of the election because he was so concerned about this kind of activity. It had nothing to do at that point with the Russians. But here we are today, and we're having a discussion as if, oh, no, President Trump isn't distorting the news and isn't misquoting President Obama. We treat it like it's serious. He's the president, so we have to have this discussion. But, I mean, even over the weekend, you just go back and you stop and you think, he's attacking McMaster, his own national security advisor, for saying the Russians definitely interfered in the election. You come forward and you say, why isn't he imposing sanctions? He's not taking it. You say, oh, he's doing more than Obama. Obama not only threw out 35 diplomats, he closed down 2 Russian diplomatic estates in the United States and imposed sanctions. And yet we're having discussions of he did more than Obama. Well, he's not doing anything.
He actually did that after the election and then ended
gosh.
up dropping the sanctions that Bush had put in place and allowed Russia to sell anti-aircraft missiles to Iran. And to Greg's point, though, just to respond to that, the Democrats, when Russia was running wild under President Obama, didn't really care too much. They didn't seem very activated. But the minute they denigrate Hillary, that's when the Democrats really become cold warriors.
Well, I think that's Greg's point, right? So that's why it's hard to take. And I also think, like, if we know that if it had been the other way around, and like, as I was saying, which I misunderstood what you were saying earlier, but that if Hillary had won and the Republicans had reason to believe that the Russians were trying to help Hillary win and make Trump lose, what would we be saying every day? So I just think that they're doing what they're going to do. But at the same time, they've spent so much time on Russia that now the Democrats, if you can see in the polling, they're starting to realize that they actually might be on their heels when it comes to these midterm elections, because the tax reform pieces move forward. And there was a quote from Jonathan Swan on Axios from the Democratic retreat where Democratic pollsters were saying that the Republicans have the wrong message, but Democrats have no message. And so that actually, I think, while we're all talking about Russia, the president has moved forward, and the Republicans have helped him move forward on policy, and the Democrats have ceded that ground, hoping that this would be their saving grace.
I kind of said the same thing that Swan said, but so much better yesterday.
But he has a nice accent.
Yes, but it goes back to what I said about when you're an Olympic athlete and all you train is for curling and you don't have any backup job. So when the curling is over and the Olympics are gone and you didn't win, you can't go back because curling has no transferable skills.
It's not sponsorship.
You can't get a sponsor. It's not going to help you get a job at FedEx.
So you're still trying to make that one work?
No, I'm trying to. I think it's a good point that right now the Russian collusion story is their curling, and they've got to figure out their backup plan. They'll probably get one, and you know what their backup plan will be? Will be that Trump's awful, because I think that you have enough people that are so vehemently opposed to him. Look, it worked with Republicans, you know, with Obama.
Yeah.
All you had to do was just say, I don't like Obama, and that'll work. And I think that'll probably work for the Democrats with Trump. But they still don't have a plan. They're still curling.
No, I don't think that's it. I do agree that they don't have a clear signal message other than anti-Trump.
Yeah.
Right.
But I do think that what you're seeing is that people, I mean, Dana was talking just a moment ago about the tax plan becoming more popular. I think it's now over 50%.
Right.
But let me just say, if you were to have a poll on ice cream and apple pie, wouldn't you expect, like a tax cut for everybody, that your numbers would be in the 80s or 90s?
Not me.
It slowly
my
comes
stomach
into
cannot
the
handle
50s
ice cream.
because people
No, but you're lactose
realize
intolerant.
so much of this money is actually going to the rich and to the corporations, and they don't like it.
The rich aren't
But
getting those
I would
bonuses.
say this about the Russia stuff. Why is it that this president
Guess what?
won't impose the sanctions? Why won't he take proactive action in terms of stopping the ongoing interference in our politics by the Russians? People, even
By
on
the way,
even
why
on the
didn't
Florida
President Obama
shooting.
do it? I
No,
love
but
this.
that's
This
a good
is
question.
rich.
Can
This
I
happens
answer
on
that
President
question?
Obama's
I want
watch.
to answer your question, Kimberly.
Dígame.
Because guess what? Kimberly would have sat here and said, look at Obama.
No.
He's saying that the Russians are interfering to benefit Trump. He's actually helping Hillary by doing it. That's what the conservatives would have said.
You know what?
I would have said,
The
go
other
out
thing,
and
too,
earn the votes. Make it happen. Don't whine and cry about it if you're not a good candidate.
you know, a lot of this stuff that everybody's getting all ticked off about is when Trump's tweeting, and the press keeps saying he's lashing out. None of these people in the press have ever had a boss, because bosses do this sort of thing all the time. They snap, they yell, and then 5 minutes later they forget. It's like moving to Seattle and waking up every morning and being surprised that or shocked that it's raining. That's the media after a year and a half with Trump. Every morning they wake up and they're shocked.
Right.
I've never had a boss like that.
Oh, my God. They're the best bosses in the world. The bosses that come in and shout.
Oh, man, I just pray for the Greg Gutfeld Show staff. All right, ahead.